In this video for section 1.3, we're going to start with some definitions. The first definition is population. The population is the set of all objects or individuals of interest. So the population of a survey could be all of the adults in the United States. Now, it would be pretty much impossible for me to give a survey to all adults in the United States and have them respond. And if I were to try to do that, it would also be very expensive. So instead, what I would do is I would use a sample, or take a subset of the population or a smaller group. So maybe my sample includes 1,000 American adults. A parameter is a numerical measure that describes a population. So for example, it might be an average. A statistic is a numerical measure that describes a sample. And it's easy to keep track of this because parameter and population both start with P, and statistic and sample both start with S. So if my numerical measure, like an average, comes from a sample, then it's considered a statistic. If I've measured everyone in the entire population, then it would be a parameter. Next, we're going to look at some sampling techniques. The first one is convenience sampling. This is where I choose the people or items to be in my sample based on accessibility and ease of selection. So an example of this would be if I were to give a survey to all of these students in my classes. Now, that's considered not the best sampling method. The textbook calls it a non-statistical sampling method, and that's because it has the possibility of being biased. So if I'm only giving the survey to students in my classes, I might be missing out on some majors, or there might be something about the students in my classes that make them different from the entire population of the university. So our second sampling technique is called simple random sampling. Now the rest of these techniques are statistical sampling methods because they are random. So simple random sampling is when everyone has an equally likely chance of being chosen. So an example of this method would be drawing names from a hat, or you could think of making a numbered list and then randomly choosing numbers, and each number chosen would correspond to a person that you would select for your survey. In stratified random sampling, what we do first is divide the population into subgroups, and these are called strata, and sample items are selected from each subgroup. So in this example, we have all financial institutions in the United States, and we divide them into three groups: large institutions, medium-sized, and small institutions. And then each financial institution or bank or credit union would go in one of these three groups. There's no overlap between the groups. Then I select a certain number out of each group, and generally we would do this proportionally. So in this example, we would choose a few from the large institutions, we would choose more medium-sized than large, and we would choose more small institutions than medium-sized because small institutions is the largest group. So I would choose more of them to keep the proportions in my sample the same as in my population. The next sampling method is called systematic random sampling. In systematic random sampling, you select every kth item, where k is a number. So for example, every 50th person on a list, every 5th person who walks into a building. So you're just counting them out and selecting however many you want to select until you have your sample complete. And the last sampling method is cluster sampling. This is where you randomly select a group and survey everyone in that group. The example in the book is that you randomly choose a section at a football stadium and survey everyone in that section. So if you think about a football stadium, if you wanted to do a simple random sample, you could randomly choose seats. However, if you were doing the sample in person, then the person conducting the sample would have to run all around the stadium and ask the question to every person, one person kind of at a time, just all over. An easier way to do it would be to choose a section, and then you can just interview everyone in that section and they're all right there. Another example of a cluster sample would be if I randomly choose a class at the university and survey all of the students in that class. Now, there is a possibility with cluster sampling that you could have bias. For example, if I choose a upper level class in a certain major where all students are in that major, then that might not be very representative. But if I choose, just an English class or something generic that all kinds of students have to take, then that could be a pretty representative sample of the population. It just depends. So those are some sampling methods.